And now, a story about a man who murdered a woman and actually went to prison for it. I know. I'm as shocked as you all are.
Sometimes the criminal justice system...
It was more like guilty until proven innocent.
...isn't all that just.
Which stage of sleepwalking involves murder? That's scary.
Of course it is.
You don't give up, do you?
I'm Jenna Friedman, and this is Indefensible. This episode is about a murder that was entirely preventable. So how did it happen? And why did it happen? And why do murders like this one keep happening?
We are in North Andover, Massachusetts. This case is still very raw. She was murdered in 2018.
Tonight, we're learning much more about the woman found murdered in the basement of a North Andover home. Family members say 49-year-old Wendy Davidson was a loving mother of two. Her family is now dealing with the shock of their loss after police revealed she'd been strangled.
This was the last photo we had of her. She was just a really good person. She was the most vivacious human being that ever walked the face of the earth.
Wendy worked as an accountant and was a single mom to two sons.
She had a heart of gold. She just lit up the room. She got along with everybody, and it was a privilege to know her.
Mm-hmm. He took the words right out of my mouth.
I was just chopping onions, so that's what this is about. I'm not crying, I just...
For her sons, there was no question who the killer was.
I was like, he killed her. No one else would have done this to her. He killed her.
Her ex-fiancé. Out of respect for the family, we will not name him or show his face in this episode.
So you don't want us to even mention his name?
I don't.
The two met on a dating website. They dated for a few months and got engaged. But then Wendy broke it off when his behavior became alarming.
She had texted me that he was becoming obsessed with her. You know, he wanted to know where she was, who she was with. When someone's trying to control what you're doing, it's certainly a huge red flag.
Upon hearing of Wendy's death, Sandy acts fast and helps police apprehend her killer.
I was the first person there, and the cop said, "Do you have any idea who could have done this?" And I had a picture of him, and I said, "Him." And I gave him his name. She told the cops where he lived.
He was already gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
A week later, police arrest Wendy's killer as he's trying to make his way across the U.S.-Mexico border.
After the news broke, the whole restaurant started clapping. I think that was the moment that we all were like, they got him, they got him.
You may be wondering, why was the family so certain he did it? Because Wendy wasn't his first victim.
You Googled him, and what did you find?
The first article that I saw was New Hampshire man accused of rape, kidnapping, attempted murder, and it just scared the crap out of me.
It turns out that in 2003, 14 years earlier, he had kidnapped and allegedly almost strangled another woman to death. He even went to prison for it. But somehow, he persuaded Wendy he was innocent.
She always saw the good in people.
She said, he'll never hurt me. I'm not worried at all. I feel completely confident that he'll never hurt me. And that still stings to me.
Now Wendy's family wonders, why was this guy even released out on parole?
I put this on the judicial system. How could they let him out of jail? And look what happened. He took our Wendy away from us.
Before he met Wendy Davidson in 2017, her killer had just served 14 years of a 10 to 30-year sentence for a violent attack eerily similar to what he later did to Wendy.
So I'm just reading about the 2003 incident. For 21 hours, he held this woman hostage in her own home. He repeatedly assaulted and beat her and had told her that he was going to kill her and hide her body in the basement. That is harrowing.
Fortunately, the woman survived and reported her horrifying ordeal to the police. But even she wasn't his first victim.
Oh my God. He has a criminal history dating back to 1984, 1990. He's indicted on 5 counts of aggravated sexual assault.
Not only that, he once even assaulted a woman in the visitor center while serving time in prison.
Jesus. The ex-fiancé of Wendy Davidson was released on parole in December 2017. Okay, just on a side note, if anyone ever murders me and I happen to be engaged to them, can you please just not call them my ex-fiancé? I mean, it's just a preference, you know.
So how does a dangerous, violent repeat offender with such an extensive criminal history end up out early on parole? I met with New Hampshire prosecutor Chris McLaughlin to learn more about the case that resulted in his 2003 arrest.
He was charged with 11 counts, most of them for aggravated felonious sexual assault, essentially rape.
So there were 10 separate charges of aggravated felonious sexual assault, and none of those ended up in a conviction?
Correct.
How not?
The one conviction for kidnapping appears to be the only charge of the 11 that was corroborated by an independent witness. There was a witness who was a woman who testified at trial that essentially she felt like the woman was being held against her will.
This little lady looking out her window, noticing a woman uncomfortable with a man, which could just in any other place be a Tuesday. The jury believed her testimony, but not the victim's testimony.
These types of cases are the most difficult cases.
When you say these types, what do you mean?
Sexual assault cases, which by definition generally occur in private.
It's almost like everyone talks about like mace in your purse, but I don't know. I would just rent an old lady to like follow me around and just be my witness in case anything happened.
In fact, sexual assault is so hard to prosecute. According to the Washington Post, less than 1% of rapes ever lead to felony convictions. And why is that? Oh, it's a combination of a lack of access to support for victims, difficulties in obtaining evidence, a narrow definition of rape according to the law, limited options in the trial, re-traumatization of the victims, juror bias, systemic injustice, that little nuisance we call the patriarchy, and we could keep going, but I think you get the point.
How did he end up out of prison at 14 years?
That really is a question for the parole board. I don't know why they released him.
The parole board has all the power?
Ultimately. A person doesn't walk out of the prison without the parole board's approval.
What kind of system lets violent repeat offenders slip through the cracks? The same system that locks up far too many nonviolent offenders and has the highest rate of mass incarceration in the entire world. It's clearly a complicated system, but it's one that Wendy trusted to keep her safe. And why shouldn't she have? In 2019, New Hampshire was ranked the best state for crime and corrections according to U.S. News and World Report. Which makes you wonder, if the highest-ranked prison system in America can't keep women safe from dangerous, abusive men, what the hell can? I guess the only way to know how Wendy's killer got out of prison early is to go straight to the source, the parole board itself. I'm meeting with Leslie Mendenhall, a former member of the New Hampshire Parole Board. Parole board members often remain anonymous for fear of retaliation. Leslie served on the board from 2012 to 2018, although she was not on the hearing for this particular case.
I can't believe you talked to us, so thank you for that.
Welcome.
So how did you end up on a parole board?
I've worked for social service agencies. I interviewed with the governor and was appointed.
How many people are there on the parole board in general?
So there's a total of 7, but sitting that day will always only be 3.
They're all working part-time.
I had a full-time job besides my part-time parole position.
What does the day-to-day look like of somebody on the parole board?
A week before, we would get a packet of information about all their offenses that they've ever committed, their time in prison, their mental health records, everything. We would read that packet on our own time. And then the day that we were due to hear people, we would have about 10 to 15 minutes. We would ask questions, raise concerns, and then render our decision.
Was there ever a time that you didn't get to every case file just because of the sheer number of them? Not you specifically. You are a diligent
No,
citizen.
I mean, I work a full-time job. I can't always say that. I can honestly say once or twice, I would only get through a certain section of them and would have to weigh heavily on my counterparts.
And how much do you get paid per week?
It would be $100 a day.
For
the day that you go to the hearing.
Wow. So in the state of New Hampshire, the job of a parole board member, a person who decides the fate of both prisoners and the society they re-enter, is both low paid and part-time? Sign me up. But I am still curious as to how the system works when it comes to rehabilitating dangerous violent offenders.
For someone who has a history of violence against women, how do they convince the parole board that they will no longer be a threat to women?
There is some pretty basic rules as to what you need to do to be paroled. During their time of incarceration, they have the opportunity to take classes in domestic violence and batterers, sex offender treatment.
How about a class in like how not to kill women? What would that look like?
Something they probably wouldn't listen very well to, would be my guess.
From your experience on the parole board, did you think that there was like a lenience towards people up for parole?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I have to think about how to say this. Everything in the world is a business, right? The more inmates who are in, the more it costs to run that facility. We were told frequently, and it was very clear to us that we needed to make sure we let as many people out as possible.
From the top down?
From the top down, yeah.
In this particular case,
okay,
where bird's eye view, this is a person with a violent past.
Yes.
And they get granted parole. And then they kill and they murder someone.
Yes.
How does that person end up getting parole?
Because he did everything he was supposed to do. He had
According to who?
According to state law. He was in the halfway house. He had a full-time job. He had money in the bank. And there was nothing unchecked that we could have held him back for. The board just can't say no. We just can't say, no, we don't think that you did a good enough job.
That's scary.
Of course it is. I used to vocalize my opinion if I disagreed. And I was told that that was not appreciated. Sometimes it just felt wrong.
In the case of Wendy Davidson's murder, there is one more minor little piece of information that perhaps should have been given a bit more consideration by the parole board. In 2017, when he was up for parole, his prior victim, who he had kidnapped in 2003, had pleaded for him to remain in prison.
68651 was found to be colluding with other prisoners about breaking out to finish the job of killing me. I ask the parole board, do not underestimate him again.
If only the parole board had listened, Wendy Davidson might still be alive.
Do you think if the woman who read the victim impact statement had read it in like a deeper voice to where she sounded like a man, the parole board would have taken her seriously?
I think the parole board took her seriously, but I don't think who read it, the tone, the manner, the depth.
The parole board didn't take her seriously because they didn't listen to her.
I disagree with that. They acted in a manner in which they were mandated to by the laws of the state of New Hampshire. he had the right to get out because he is a human being with rights.
Do you think that he had more rights than the women he victimized?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
And the parole board hears all of this, and there's nothing the parole board can do.
There's nothing the parole board can do because he's met all the requirements to be paroled.
So then why does a parole board exist?
Because he is an isolated case. There's thousands of inmates that are always doing the right things, and when they get out, they're going to continue to do the right things.
So then
they need a means in which to get out. You can't get out unless you do your maximum sentence or go before the parole board.
So the parole board's kind of like a toll collector, and the people collect a little bit of, not money, but whatever, and then they go to the parole board and they take the things that they've gotten and they just dump it in, and the parole board's like, you can go.
Yes.
So the parole board is as effective as a toll booth.
In your analogy, yes, it does fit.
So if you're a violent sex offender,
and you have an easy pass, you go through.
and if you're a violent sex offender and you have exact change,
you go through.
And despite the incredible, monumental, tragic failure of the system in releasing Wendy Davidson's killer, there remain many inmates in New Hampshire and all across America who either shouldn't be in prison to begin with or do deserve to be released on parole. In fact, according to Prison Policy Initiative, parole systems are failing in almost every U.S. state, with the exception of Wyoming, the least populated one. Seems pretty easy to run a parole system if there are no people in it. But in a state like New Hampshire, working as a parole board member can be challenging, which left me with one question.
How do you sleep at night?
Sometimes I don't.
In 2019, after Wendy Davidson's murder and the murder of another woman by another man who had just been paroled, the state of New Hampshire conducted an audit of their parole board. Curious as to how that went, I reached out to New Hampshire's current parole board and the state's Department of Corrections for comment, but no one would talk to us. If we can't rely on the system to protect us from violent abusers, who can we rely on? New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence specialist Linda Douglas.
What we need to do is to make sure that there are policies in place that keep women and children safe.
People care about kids.
Yes.
They might not care about women, but if we can focus on the kids,
yes,
men might care too.
Yes.
That's comforting.
Yeah.
How do people get out of abusive relationships?
It's really about calling a local domestic violence program, calling a national or statewide hotline, and talking to an advocate through the situation, and they can do a safety plan with you based on your particular circumstances.
It still feels as if the onus is on victims of domestic violence to escape their situation as opposed to on abusers.
That's the key thing there, is that we're not holding abusive partners accountable for their actions. What I really want to see is just other males holding males accountable who they see are engaging in these types of behaviors.
To the men in the room operating sound and cameras, what Linda's saying is you guys need to step up and stop other men from killing us. You got that, Jeremy?
Got it.
Cool. 3 men down, only a few billion to go.
And just for the record, I love men. I'm half man on my dad's side. And I hire men when women aren't available. So I just want to put that out there.
Oh, good for you.
Wendy's killer is now serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. But that won't bring back Wendy. If only more people, lawmakers, law enforcement, politicians, juries, and voters, I'm talking to you, took violence against women a little more seriously, then maybe some of the many murders of women by their intimate partners in our country could actually be prevented.